Good evening, 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 good evening. Um, I have a few things I want to throw your guys' way. Um, I'm going to be here for a little while, but not a long time. Just a couple of things I want to put out here. Um, with that being said, uh, let's go with this.
The judges don't trust you. You can't do the basic things that you need to do to represent the American people in court. And we have seen judges across the country say they can't trust prosecutors anymore. And that has such a cascading effect on any sort of case. I can't count how many opinions, but one opinion like that in my career would have been seismic. People would not know what to do if a court said, trust that's been built over generations has been lost in days, right? And that's happening every day. And so regardless of what you think politically, they're just not effective at doing their job anymore. They've jettisoned expertise, right? And so we have a situation where we've got rid of people who know how to protect our national security. And we think that that's somehow not going to have an effect on our national security. An example I can give you, Brian Driscoll. I don't know if you know who he is. Mm-hmm. He made
a great video at the beginning to kind of rally the troops that saved from the outside.
Yeah, I mean, he's a folk hero in the FBI. If you were casting for a hero, right. That's what they look Central like, casting, right? Yes. And just for your viewers, this is a guy, career agent, mob investigator, SWAT team, hostage rescue, served overseas, Medal of Valor, all these things, and an expert in counterintelligence. They got rid of him because he stood up for agents who were being targeted improperly. You cannot tell me our country is as safe as it was when people like that are being let go and fired for no reason.
Dennis, I am so excited to have you back on. How are you doing?
People like that are being let go and fired for no reason.
I have some questions, but I want to give you a chance, because you've been busy interviewing, to share with your audience, with our whole MS Now audience, any of your top line or first takeaways. And then I have a question for you as well.
Well, I'm just so struck by how decency and integrity and facts and apolitical sort of careers don't screech. Right? And so much of what we're oriented to cover is that which is shrieking, right? They're shrieking by arresting tourists at the reflecting pool, or shrieking by diverting intelligence agents from the FBI to some crackpot case in Georgia, or shrieking because someone has covered concerning conduct by the director of the FBI. And instead, what integrity sounds like is something a lot more methodical and calm and by the book. And I think that when we get to meet the people that we've covered, I was deathly nervous. I reread every piece of paper we ever had. But the thing about public servants is there's not some, they don't hide the secret side. It's not a diversion. And I thought about how much Trump has sort of broken my brain. I'm sitting here trying to figure out what he hid and what he didn't tell us. And a lot of what we talked about were the kinds of things that you and I covered from the filings and the things that were public facing.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I have a couple questions. The first was thinking about who we're listening to. And as I mentioned, he obviously trusts you and thinks of you as someone that he can have a factual dialogue with about the health of our civic life and our democracy and our rule of law. And I think that's striking. And it's not a surprise to those of us who work with you, but it bears noting, even if we are also colleagues. And in doing that, he was issuing, he was issuing the warning. I mean, if Bob Mueller was the Elliot Ness of his time, Jack Smith is a Bob Mueller of our time. And he had nothing but, kind words of respect for how Mueller lived his life and career and integrity. And so when we listen to what I'm calling the Mueller of our time today, Bob Mueller has passed, and he tells you tonight that we are facing this attack on the rule of law that is different. That this is not, sometimes there are crimes and sometimes there are people in office who have been caught committing crimes in both parties, as he was careful to note. But this is something different. We have just that short bit. I don't know if it jumped out to you in the moment, but let's listen to that for your response.
I think we are facing an attack on the rule of law that is different in kind and scope to anything I've seen in my lifetime.
So what does that mean to you, that he wants us to know that?
Well, look, in some ways, there's so much gaslighting in our politics, and there's so much sort of an attempt to intimidate people covering the facts as we see them with our own eyes, that it was reassuring that he sees what we see and what we cover, and that from his extraordinarily high perch inside the department and with all of his years of experience, he views it as dire as I do. It was, I would say, equally striking that when I asked him, if you were looking at our country and just assessing it in terms of whether the rule of law were alive or dead, is it still alive? He said, absolutely. I mean, that he knows of sort of more pockets, I guess, the things that aren't in the headlines inside the department that are still, and he said, they're not throwing sand in the gear. They're not part of the resistance. They're just in there doing their job. But then he did say, I said, but what if doing their job, ran afoul of Mr. Blanche or others? And he said, yeah, well, that would be the fork in the road. I mean, what was interesting to me is that it is both as bad as it looks from the outside, that weaponization is the central organizational theory for the Department of Justice, that the examples that he lifted up were Danielle Sassoon, that's who he was talking about there at the end, who left over the perfectly predicated case against Eric Adams, the folks who have, left before bringing the cases against Jim Comey, Eric Siebert, and others, the people in Minnesota he mentioned who refused to investigate family members of a shooting victim. What is, I think, still... I think the work for people like us is to do what he's talking about, to lift up the people who are sort of paying the price of their life's work, of people who grow up and want to do this work are some of the very ones who rose to the top. And those ones at the top are the ones that worked on his cases. So I think I had a greater appreciation for the loss of experience, the loss of the cream of the crop, right? The people that have been purged were not necessarily the first agents in. They were the best of the best, the ones who understood the sensitive nature of the cases against Donald Trump, the ones who had enough clearances to even work on the Mar-a-Lago documents case. He couldn't say anything about that one, and didn't bite when I asked him if he thought Aileen Cannon would be nominated to the Supreme Court. But I think it was both reassuring that he sees the direness of the moment, the way you and I think largely cover it, and it was ominous to think about all the experience that's been axed for political purpose from the Bureau and the department.
Yeah, and when you take out the experts, the tough people, the folks with multi-decade experience in catching the bad folks, then wholly separate from the rule of law issues, which we care so much about, you also make the country less safe, quite literally so. I have one more question for you, then I'll let you go. I'm kind of Lawrencing your Rachel right now.
We can do this anytime. I'm always available.
In lyrics, the famous lyric is, "Please, Lord, don't let me be misunderstood."
This almost feels illegal to know after a car accident. Never sue the person who crashed into you if you want to potentially get a...
In lyrics, the famous lyric is, "Please, Lord, don't let me be misunderstood." And I felt through him, and I'm curious your take, that like Mueller before him, and like folks who were using the integrity, quiet rule book, and we understand why in normal times that has been the norm.
Okay.
That he referred back repeatedly, even when it wasn't in your question, to communicating, to reaching people with the facts, and making people understand these cases. And I wonder, because you were a communicator in your own right, and here we are in media, so that's part of what we do is look at the stories, define them, try to tell them. What it says about, you said broke your brain, well, whether a reality show propagandist has broke some of the communication and storytelling in our country, where My view, and I'm curious yours, I think he's basically right in his theory of the case. That if you don't communicate in real time with the way people are getting information on their phones, etc. today, you're at a disadvantage. And yet I also thought it's too bad that people doing the substantive work, not to diminish the communication we all do, but the people doing substantive work, like I don't want my doctor or my beat cop prosecutor thinking too much about the press release when they need to do the job. I give you the final word on that tonight.
So I thought about Tim Snyder when we had this part of the conversation, who, wrote on tyranny, writes about autocracy. And I thought about how you don't need to overwhelm people by making everyone think that we all have to do everything, right? We all have to do our thing. And what I thought was interesting is he has what every veteran of the Department of Justice has for Robert Mueller, and that's reverence, full stop. And he's making some different choices. So he didn't say that he learned, and he said to me, it wasn't on my mind at all. It is also true that in one news cycle, Donald Trump and Bill Barr destroyed 23 months of Robert Mueller's meticulous, respectful deference to the prerogatives of Donald Trump when he was interviewing him. And Jack Smith has made a lot of the same choices, but a few different choices. And I think that's really interesting in its own right.
And he tells you tonight that we are facing this attack on the rule of law that is different. That this is not, sometimes there are crimes and sometimes there are people in office who have been caught committing crimes in both parties, as he was careful to note, but this is something different. We have just that short bit. I don't know if it jumped out to you in the moment, but let's listen to that for your response.
I think we are facing an attack on the rule of law that is different in kind and scope to anything I've seen in my lifetime.
So what does that mean to you, that he wants us to know that?
Well, look, in some ways, there's so much gaslighting in our politics, and there's so much sort of an attempt to intimidate people covering the facts as we see them with our own eyes, that it was reassuring that he sees what we see and what we cover, and that from his extraordinarily high perch inside the department and with all of his years of experience, he views it as dire as I do. It was, I would say, equally striking that when I asked him, if you were looking at our country and just assessing it in terms of whether the rule of law were alive or dead, is it still alive? He said, absolutely. I mean, that he knows of sort of more pockets, I guess, the things that aren't in the headlines inside the department that are still, and he said, they're not throwing sand in the gear. They're not part of the resistance. They're just in there doing their job. But then he did say, I said, but what if doing their job, ran afoul of Mr. Blanche or others? And he said, yeah, well, that would be the fork in the road. I mean, what was interesting to me is that it is both as bad as it looks from the outside, that weaponization is the central organizational theory for the Department of Justice, that the examples that he lifted up were Daniel Sassoon, that's who he was talking about there at the end, who left over the perfectly predicated case against Eric Adams, the folks who have, left before bringing the cases against Jim Comey, Eric Siebert, and others, the people in Minnesota he mentioned who refused to investigate family members of a shooting victim. What is, I think, still, I think the work for people like us is to do what he's talking about, to lift up the people who are sort of paying the price of their life's work, of people who grow up and want to do this work are some of the very ones who rose to the top. And those ones at the top were the ones that worked on his cases. So I think I had a greater appreciation for the loss of experience, the loss of the cream of the crop, right? The people that have been purged were not necessarily the first agents in. They were the best of the best, the ones who understood the sensitive nature of the cases against Donald Trump, the ones who had enough clearances to even work on the Mar-a-Lago documents case. He couldn't say anything about that one, and didn't bite when I asked him if he thought Aileen Cannon would be nominated to the Supreme Court. But I think it was both reassuring that he sees the direness of the moment, the way you and I think largely cover it, and it was ominous to think about all the experience that's been axed for political purpose from the Bureau and the department.
For the first time, the first prosecutor to ever indict a president, Jack Smith, who ultimately did it twice because he said the evidence supported it, speaking out in his first journalistic interview, including about those controversial January 6th pardons.
If you got hit, even as a passenger or in an Uber, you need to try this. I'm an attorney. I've been doing this for years. And I'm standing here because most people walk away from accidents.
Journalistic interview, including about those controversial January 6th pardons.
What do you say about the facts that you developed that you see? I know you don't watch a ton of news, but you see enough to know that the basic principle of recidivism likely applies to the election case. The things that you charged are a lot of the same kinds of stories we cover. What is the cost of someone not being held accountable for their crimes?
Yeah, I mean, if you talk about the pardons of these people convicted for the violence on January 6th, right? There's all sorts of costs. There's the obvious cost of just recidivism. These are people who committed their crimes in the name and in the interest of Donald Trump, and he's returned the favor, right, by pardoning them. That sends one message to them. A message I'm equally concerned about is the message that it sends to law enforcement. Supporting law enforcement should not be a political issue.
Jack Smith speaking forthrightly there on 2 points. The second, as you heard, is that Donald Trump sided with violent criminals over police, that he is an anti-police president. The pardon is a power that the president constitutionally has. No one is saying that it was itself illegal. Smith is saying, however, that it is anti-police, anti-law enforcement. The first point he made was admittedly a little more legalistic. He referred to recidivism. What he's saying in plain English is, if you let people get away with it, they'll do it again. And that maybe Donald Trump wants to do it again, to have another violent insurrection or other violent crime committed on his behalf. Recidivism is why you have strong penalties and deterrence under the law, something that prosecutors like Smith basically devote their lives to. And he's saying, for the first time in the modern era, it's the president undercutting that on behalf of criminals. He also spoke about the midterms.
I'm very concerned of what's going to happen in the next election, absolutely.
Do you see, again, in things that are covered and things that are public-facing, conduct ahead of the midterms that you investigated on in the January 6th case?
Well, I've been thinking about it more in terms of what needs to be done based on what we saw happen last time. And, it's a different situation now based on, the people who perpetrated January 6th have probably learned from how they did that. My personal view is I think the state attorney generals have a tremendous role to play here. They can make sure the rule of law functions in their state. And I would also say that I think a thing that all of us can do is support election workers and election officials. The last time around, we saw that those people stood firm, and they were, in many cases, the difference. It's clear to me, anyways, that what I've seen publicly, that those people are going to be put under great pressure. And my experience, not only just the special counsel, but I was the chief of the public integrity section at the Department of Justice for 5 years. Had a number of cases with election officials. These are people also. They're not tooting their own horn. They're not self-promoters. They just care about our democracy. We need to show them that we have their back.
Smith speaking out clearly there in this new MS Now exclusive interview. When he mentions the public integrity section, which has been, of course, completely decimated under Donald Trump, that's the part of the DOJ that deals with the important but sensitive cases of anti-corruption and potentially indicting or prosecuting lawmakers, politically connected individuals, important politicians. To run that section, you have to have kind of the gold standard of being evidence-based, nonpartisan, and having integrity. It's kind of the fulcrum of pressure inside the DOJ. When he was there, for example, he pursued famously a case against Democrat John Edwards because he said the evidence supported it. And ultimately, as we know, concluded that there was enough evidence to go after Donald Trump. I mentioned a case of a Democrat and Republican. So when Smith then now draws on that credibility and his entire career to assess the so-called enemies list or some of the cases that the Trump DOJ has brought on his personal demand, it comes with great credibility. Most people may only know from prosecuting Trump, and that might even overweight how you look at it. But he is kind of like, I'm telling you, the legal gold standard for these cases. So when he says, as we just learned he did, I'm going to play you the excerpt, that so many of them lack any merit, that is kind of the ultimate slam dunk against some of the Trump DOJ's revenge cases. Take a look.
I, from my perspective, have seen a number of cases. James Comey, Letitia James, Jerome Powell. I mean, right? There's not criminality here. I mean, seashells. I mean, so the only reasonable explanation is the president has it out for these people, and he has people who, his former personal lawyers, who are going to do what he says, regardless of the factual law.
Going after people regardless of the law will get you a lot of trouble in court, might get your case tossed.
Yep.
And if some of those folks are doing it knowingly, below the legal standard of what it takes to indict someone, they could be disbarred or worse. Jack Smith, again, the expert on that. So that's not nothing. And for those who say, well, when is it going to matter? Well, it could matter very soon if Congress changes hands, and it could matter a lot in just over 2 years if the White House and DOJ changes hands. He's sort of telling you how it is tonight. Now, I want to just remind everyone, we are here in an extraordinary place. A few years ago, it would have been unthinkable that a prosecutor would be on television talking about not one but 2 federal cases against a former president. It had never happened before. So let's remember how we got here, because what started out with lawsuits turned ultimately into the insurrection in the 2020 plots. Some of them we've marked for you green or yellow because they were effectively legally allowed. But as Trump got more desperate and those things didn't work, when you get to the Congress overturning votes, the requests on Pence, the aborted plan to have a military plot or coup, and then ultimately the final arrow we all know, the illegal sabotage of January 6th, those were the plots that accrued. And Smith ultimately was tapped as one of these special counsels with extra independence to pursue them. And as you know, I'll remind you, as we plotted this, he indicted many of them. And one
as he was supposed to.
Against, we saw at the state level, over the overlapping plots. The federal cases, of course, were truncated by the Supreme Court.
Researching dental implants? Did you know you can now get permanent teeth in just 24 hours?
Plots. The federal cases, of course, were truncated by the Supreme Court.
We have 2 fellows who are also not intimidated, and I really want to get both of your reactions to what you heard there and how this conversation is now getting framed by Jack Smith. You first, Mike.
Yeah, I think what he did this afternoon on Nicole Wallace's show was incredibly important. The Justice Department, for our careers at least, and for many generations before that, would always say within its own hallways, we speak through indictments, we speak through official documents. We're not proselytizers of our theories. We're not holding a lot of press conferences. And at a time where norms were respected by both political polls and everything in between, that made a lot of sense. I very much hope we get back to that world. But we're lying to ourselves if we pretend that we are in a normal time now. The ideals that the Justice Department has always stood for, the concept of justice itself, the moral imperative from which the department takes its name, is not functioning as it is supposed to. There is, quite frankly, a cancer in the RFK building right now. I think we can stop it. I think we can cut it out eventually. But what is happening in those hallways, what is happening on the 7th floor, is not normal. And it requires a response to meet the exigencies of this moment. And I'm glad he's stepping up and making that response.
I just add 2 things. I think there's 2 reasons why it's really helpful for Jack Smith specifically to be talking right now. One is, as time passes, the indictments that he brought and why they were brought grow more and more distant. And what I'm worried about is as we get further and further away from January 6th and the insurrection, we run the risk of creating a false equivalency. That it's like, okay, maybe Donald Trump's doing something kind of political with these prosecutions, but he got prosecuted too. And so, Jack Smith is an embodiment of why Donald Trump was righteously prosecuted for fomenting the insurrection to try to overturn a Democratic election. And then stealing confidential information, and at least there was some public reporting suggesting that he might have been trying to sell that information. So I think it's really important for him as a person to be speaking out and making sure that history doesn't get forgotten. The second thing that I think is important here is, you made the point about how well respected Jack Smith is here. I think his presence outside of the Department of Justice is going to give a little bit of courage to folks inside the Department of Justice, the career folks, to leave. We were talking about this earlier. I say it every time. The only thing the Department of Justice has is its credibility, its ability to convince judges and juries of things. And the problem that I see right now is you've got career prosecutors who, for very understandable reasons, for moral reasons, are trying to stay in RFK, stay in the building. I think that's a mistake. They're lending their credibility to an institution that doesn't deserve it right now. People like Jack Smith show that there is a future for them outside of that institution.
It's interesting because he spoke to that. He spoke to the idea of earning trust. Let's play that tape if we can. I think if you have a question of, is a rioter who assaulted a police officer on January 6th a patriot, or is Harry Dunn a patriot? We win that argument every time if people have the facts. I think we've now learned that you got to be able to get people to understand the facts. We've got a great product in the work that we did as a special counsel, the work the Justice Department does every day. But the people who do it, who are really the reason you can trust it, they don't promote themselves. And so we need to get their stories out there. I think if that happens, the sort of trust in government, which is pretty hard to earn, we can do that.
Brendan, we have a great product out there. It's just not seen because, in the narcissistic world that we live in, these people are too diligent. They aren't self-promoters. But maybe that has to change in order for people to really get the facts and understand the gravity of the situation.
Yeah, I think there's the cultural aspect of not wanting to speak out and wanting to speak through indictment. So, I hope that Jack Smith sort of changes his attitude on that and starts speaking out more. I also think, bluntly, there's a money aspect to this, which is, there is an enormous amount of money and political power being used to try to rewrite the history of January 6th and the elections. I remember after Trump got reelected, I was talking with any number of people about, folks wanted to create a museum to January 6th and things like that. It didn't come together because the money wasn't there, so there's a huge imbalance, which just makes it even more important for folks like him to be speaking out.
Can I just get you to also, I'll just throw this on the table, as Michael Steele was saying, you take it wherever you want to go. He also acknowledged that the assault on our elections is alive and well right now. And he instructed state attorney generals to hold the line, to think about what it is that they will do when they are confronted with this. He talked about the election workers that held firm the last time Donald Trump tried this. To be very clear, he tried it in 2020, as you all well know, and noted that they were the ones that, frankly, that made a difference to people at the state level. I think when folks hear people like me say, I think Donald Trump is trying to steal the election and these are the ways in which they're trying to do it, they think I'm being dramatic and hyperbolic. But you just heard Jack Smith lay it out in a way that I hope folks are paying attention to.
Any conversation about this topic has to begin with the remembrance of the fact that Donald Trump was indicted for criminally conspiring to overthrow the Democratic election. That has never before happened in the United States. He didn't give up. He left power because all avenues had been exhausted, but he and his allies have now had 4 years to think of smarter ways to subvert the democratic process, which is why we see Tulsi Gabbard selectively releasing intelligence information to make Democrats look bad, why Bill Pulte, who is nothing more than a bagman and a henchman, has been put in her place there to continue the work, why Kash Patel's FBI is raiding election offices in swing states. None of this is normal. No satisfactory explanations have been given to the public for any of this. And people need to pay attention because there's another inconvenient fact that we don't talk about. Donald Trump didn't seize power in the 2024 election. He was elected.
Yeah.
He was elected with the American people full well knowing he was willing to break the law to stay in power and that he was willing to abscond from the White House with classified documents, that he was willing to violate campaign finance laws in a fashion that got him convicted in New York, that he was credibly determined
The
to have
drag is real. Keep going about the fight. I'm like, damn, the American people, we failed. Keep going. The ones that voted for Trump did, not me. 92% strong.
We did. As a country, as a polity, we let this happen. Which means that we cannot look to other people to fix it for us. So we have to do the hard work of democratic mobilization, campaigning, protesting, speaking, and advocating. And on those last two counts, I'm really glad that those of us who made that choice months ago now have Jack Smith on our side.
Well, we finally moved from California to South Carolina, and it was the best decision we ever made, except for one thing. And I'll get to that part in a second because it almost ruined everything. Yeah. But let me back up.
Here we go.
I'm glad that those of us who made that choice months ago now have Jack Smith on our side.
Well, cooperation ends today. It is time for him to pay. Those rhyming lines were aimed at Donald Trump, and they are from one of the many people Donald Trump hates. Today, as every Republican in Congress, in the House, and in the Senate who is running for re-election cowers in fear of Donald Trump every single day of their lives, people who Donald Trump threatens, people who Donald Trump hates as much as he has ever hated anyone, continue to stand up to Donald Trump. And one of them is going to make him pay, and pay very soon. Former Special Prosecutor Jack Smith came to this network today to do the first interview he has ever done about his two federal criminal prosecutions of Donald Trump. Did that interview with Nicole Wallace here at 5 p.m. Donald Trump has repeatedly threatened to imprison Jack Smith, and Jack Smith, who told Congress in public testimony that he developed proof that Donald Trump is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, said today there is nothing Donald Trump can say or do to intimidate him.
I am not going to be intimidated, and there's no way in the world, if the thought was to go after me so that I wouldn't speak up about the corruption that's happening or speak up to defend these agents and prosecutors, that is a grave miscalculation. There's no way I'm going to be intimidated.
And E. Jean Carroll, who is now 82 years old and who has beaten Donald Trump in court repeatedly in two different cases, is now telling Donald Trump it is time to pay up. E. Jean Carroll's most recent crushing of Donald Trump in court came when the United States Supreme Court unanimously rejected Donald Trump's appeal of the $5 million judgment that a federal jury awarded to E. Jean Carroll 3 years ago after finding Donald Trump, as the New York Times put it, quote, liable for sexually abusing and defaming Ms. Carroll. In order to pursue his appeal, Donald Trump had to put the $5 million in an escrow account controlled by the judge in the case. Both sides of the case, Donald Trump's lawyers and E. Jean Carroll's lawyers, at the time agreed that the money would have to be paid as soon as Donald Trump got to the end of the line of his appeals, which is, of course, the denial of a petition for the Supreme Court to hear the case. And that happened on Monday. And immediately, according to E. Jean Carroll's lawyers, Donald Trump's lawyers called E. Jean Carroll's lawyers to ask for an extension on paying the money that Donald Trump now owes E. Jean Carroll in that case. Attorney Roberta Kaplan, who has successfully represented E. Jean Carroll in this case at every stage, told the judge in writing, quote, defendant's counsel contacted Carroll's undersigned counsel to inquire whether Carroll would consent to a further stay of enforcement of the judgment in this action so that defendant can ask the Supreme Court to reconsider its denial. And yeah, I'm kind of laughing about that because the Supreme Court just doesn't reconsider their denials. I mean, theoretically, technically, it's possible, but it's way, way, way less than a 1% chance. E. Jean Carroll's lawyer
had a one-word answer for the Trump lawyers: no. And then she immediately filed a motion with the judge saying, quote, the court should enforce the plain language of the existing stipulation and order and direct immediate disbursement of funds. Because the $5 million judgment gains interest every day that Donald Trump doesn't pay it, and it has been gaining that interest for 3 years now. The total that Donald Trump actually owes E. Jean Carroll as of Tuesday was $5,779,783, and it has gone up since then because it goes up every day that Donald Trump doesn't pay it. E. Jean Carroll's lawyer reminded the judge of all the delay tactics Donald Trump has used throughout this case over the years, and quoted the judge himself as having said in the past that Donald Trump, quote, should not be permitted to run the clock out on a plaintiff's attempt to gain a remedy. E. Jean Carroll's lawyer ended her 9-page motion with these words, quote, to date, Carroll has agreed to each of defendants' many requests to delay the payment he owes her, given the extraordinary lengths he has taken to avoid such payments, and that each of those efforts has been denied in full. That cooperation ends today. It is time for him to pay. Carroll. The judge gave Donald Trump a deadline of next Tuesday, July 7th, to reply to that motion. It is at this point impossible to foresee any other outcome than the judge ordering Donald Trump to pay the now almost $5.8 million that he owes E. Jean Carroll within a matter of days, probably within this month of July. And so it's time's up for Donald Trump because E. Jean Carroll says it is. Time's up for Donald Trump because our judicial system was designed to allow a private citizen to have the same rights and powers in a courtroom that anyone else has, even if the other person in the case is currently the president of the United States. And that is why Donald Trump has tried to destroy that system. That is why Donald Trump has tried to poison the federal judiciary with incompetent federal judges like the one he appointed in Florida, whose place in history will be having disgraced herself by doing everything she possibly could to block Jack Smith's prosecution of Donald Trump for violations of the Espionage Act and the illegal possession of classified documents after Donald Trump left the presidency. That is why Donald Trump has poisoned the Justice Department by trying to fill it with people, including an FBI director, with no allegiance or expertise and no allegiance to anything or anyone other than Donald Trump. Donald Trump cannot survive in a federal criminal justice system that actually works. And so he's done everything he can to destroy it, not because of some political or philosophical belief, but entirely as a matter of self-protection. From brave plaintiffs like E. Jean Carroll, could not be intimidated by Donald Trump, and brave prosecutors like Jack Smith, who could not be intimidated by Donald Trump. Donald Trump can afford the $5.8 million that he owes E. Jean Carroll, and the federal judge handling the case knows that, because like all federal judges in New York City, he must read the New York Times, which has been delivering the best reporting on Donald Trump's profiting from the presidency.
Okay, here's more.
Developing right now on Morning News Now, swept white and blue. The 4th of July weekend shaping up to be one of the hottest ever. This morning, tens of millions of people across the East Coast bracing for dangerous triple-digit temperatures, on track to break records in several major cities. The summer sizzle paired with the threat of severe storms, just as people head out of town for the holiday. We're tracking the conditions, the warnings, and what you can expect where you're going. Also this morning, let freedom ring. From the Liberty Bell to the Statue of Liberty, festivities are now underway for America's 250th birthday. President Trump preparing to address Americans from the National Mall in Washington. where hundreds of thousands of people are expected to watch what's being called the world's largest fireworks display. We'll have more on the celebrations. Plus, gone bad, one state taking a big step toward cutting down on food waste. We're going to tell you about new labeling law in California and the push now to make it part of a wider effort. And baby, just say yes. That's right, Swifties. The 4th of July isn't the only celebration happening this weekend. Hundreds of Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce's closest friends and family now descending upon the world's most famous arena to celebrate the next era of their love story. We will have all the excitement. Good morning, good to have you with us. I'm Joe Fryer. Savannah is off today. Plenty to celebrate this weekend, but you're going to have to do it amid those record-breaking temperatures that are baking most of the country. Right now, more than 150 million people are waking up under heat advisories. It's really bad in the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic, where temperatures in some spots are almost 20 degrees higher than normal. This sweltering heat is prompting officials to issue warnings. Do not spend too much time outside. Of course, a lot of folks are leaving their homes. A record-setting 72 million Americans are expected to travel this holiday season. Most will be driving, which will cause major headaches on the highways as temperatures soar. Let's hope the AC in your car is working. We're covering this story from all angles, including the hot forecast and how to navigate those travel headaches. We're going to start with NBC's Sam Brock in New York City with the latest on the heat wave. Sam, good morning.
Joe, good morning. Excitement is in the air here in New York City, and so is a whole lot of humidity. The timing could hardly be any worse on this. You have millions of Americans that are getting ready to spend basically all day outside tomorrow celebrating in epic fashion America's 250th birthday, while at the same time we're pushing heat indexes of 110 or higher in some cities. I'm in Brooklyn Bridge Park right now. Over my shoulder, you see the bridge. There's going to be fireworks launched from there, and on barges here on the East River, you'll have tall ships sailing right through the East River, and on the other side of the city, the Hudson River too. And at the same time, people are just going to be trying to balance being outside with not putting themselves at risk, because we recorded all kinds of historic numbers just yesterday. You're talking about Williamsport, Pennsylvania, a new record of 100 degrees, Washington, D.C., 102, Newark, New Jersey, Joe, 104 degrees. And we also have certainly seen that many cities are responding by declaring heat emergencies, right? That's happened in New York, Washington, D.C., Philly, Boston, all of these areas right now just smothered in a blanket of heat. We are also seeing the effects when it comes to power outages. Con Ed, which is the main utility provider here in New York City, just posted shortly ago that they've had to restore somewhere in the neighborhood of 60,000 customers' power because of this heat wave. Now, so far, we haven't reached critical mass on that, but Mayor Mamdani here in New York calling on residents to keep their thermostats at 78 degrees. And Con Ed has had to reduce the voltage in areas like the Bronx and Westchester County, which is just north of New York. So it is potentially a serious situation if the temperature and thermometer dials up even more. It's so hot here in the city, Joe, that one woman even stuck her foot onto the sidewalk in asphalt, pulled it away, and you saw her shoe print in the sidewalk. Just to give you sort of a window into how insane it is here. I would also add that, just to throw in another mix, another angle to all of this, you had shark sightings on Long Island. So people that were trying to escape New York to just get out there, get onto the shoreline, enjoy some nice cooler water, they saw sharks, and in Hempstead had to be pulled off of the beach. Just some of the many things that people are trying to balance here. Obviously, there's a ton of anticipation for what we're about to witness, but it has to be done with a level of caution because the consequences could certainly be dangerous, and everyone is well aware of that. Joe, let me send it back to you.
All right, sweat or shark, those are your options, Sam. Thank you. Let's get a closer look at just how high those temps will reach, at the risk of storms for those looking to the skies for the fireworks. Angie Lastman joins us now with the forecast. Angie, good morning.
Joe, see, none of the above. I don't want the sweat. I don't want the sharks. I would like another option. Work on that for me. You've got that right. We've got a whole lot of heat to talk about. 151 million people under these heat alerts. It's been like this for days and days, this amount of heat alerts, with those heat index values being a real concern, upwards of 100 to 110, even close to 115 in some spots. And we've got dozens of records once again potentially breaking as we get through the day today and even into the weekend. New York City, one of those spots where we're expecting 102 degrees for your temperature today. If we can get to 103, that would be a record for this date. Either way, it's going to feel like 110.
index in Pittsburgh. Roanoke ends up at 103, feeling like 105 in Columbia. Nashville, your actual temperature 100, but you will feel like 113. So still the dangerous heat kind of stuck across much of the east. As we get into tomorrow, getting the weekend underway, 98 in New York City, feeling like 104. Norfolk, 101, feeling like 113. We don't see any relief, unfortunately, as we get into Saturday, and some spots will start to get a little bit of relief by the time we get into the end of the weekend. So Chicago, you're down to the low 80s by Sunday, Monday, and into Tuesday, you get back up to the mid 80s. It's the 90s for Sunday in Washington, D.C., but notice that Tuesday temperature, 83. That's going to feel really nice for folks there. Unfortunately, if you live in Raleigh, you're into the triple digits through at least the beginning of this upcoming work week, and then 97 degrees, that's all you're going to get for a bit of a cool down on Tuesday. That's not saying much. And when you look at those heat index values, you can see even when we do get a little bit of relief in some of these spots, we're still fairly warm and uncomfortable through at least the weekend and into early next week. Also, we've been talking about this for days where we've got all that heat, and that's also causing some problems with trapping all that pollution at the surface. So you're going to want to limit your outdoor activities if you live in places like New York, Nantucket, Atlantic City, Washington, D.C. If you have breathing issues, we've got the air quality alerts up. Those are going to stay with us likely through the next couple of days. And to add to all of that, we've also got the storm chances. This is something that could interrupt some maybe fireworks plans. We've got this afternoon and evening some stronger thunderstorms stretching from the plains across the Great Lakes and out to the northeast, mainly looking at wind gusts and hail. The tornado risk is on the low end. But as we get into tomorrow, again, centered across parts of the mid-Atlantic and the northeast, another chance for some stronger storms. We've just got all the ingredients there to kind of spark those. So Pittsburgh to New York City, Philadelphia, Ocean City, New Jersey, all of those locations going to watch for the potential for some stronger storms tomorrow. And then as we look at your Sunday, that slight risk kind of stays with us across some of those same regions. So dodging the thunderstorms is going to be something you'll have to do while also trying to cool down. And when it comes to travel impacts today, I think across parts of the plains to the northeast, of course, those thunderstorms could impact you. We'll watch some of those downpours across Florida, but places like New York City, Minneapolis, Chicago, Joe, those are the locations that you'll likely see some delays if you are heading to the airport or going to be on the roadways.
All right, Angie, thank you so much. Now, despite the heat, a record-breaking number of Americans are expected to hit the roads and skies this holiday weekend. AAA says more than 72 million people will travel more than 50 miles from their home between now and Sunday. Of course, gas prices are higher than they were this time last year, so are airline tickets, so many are choosing to drive and stay a little closer to home. NBC News national correspondent Aaron Gilchrist is in Atlanta. There's more on what travelers can expect. Aaron, good morning.
Today is the federal observance of the Independence Day holiday, and that means millions of people do have this day off, and that could help folks get a head start on the long weekend travel. AAA says 72 million Americans are expected to travel this holiday weekend. That includes about 61 million people moving by car. So, a few things you may need to know. On average, right now, a gallon of gasoline is costing about 70 cents more than it did this time last year, but it is down from the peak back in May, and that's a bit of good news for you. As far as traffic goes, well, AAA warns that roads are going to start hitting that peak congestion that we hear about around noon today, and that'll go through about dinner time. So if you're able to leave before 11 o'clock this morning, that could help you save a little bit of time. And you don't want to forget to have water, to have that emergency kit in the car with you, especially with this extreme heat that we're dealing with in so many places. Now, as for more than 6 million people who are flying this holiday, prices for tickets, we know they're up about 5%. And according to the FAA, more than 51,000 planes are expected to be in the air today. We've already seen some complications. We know that JFK had a temporary ground stop in place yesterday afternoon. And really, that was just because of the extremely high volume they had to deal with at that airport. So you want to make sure you pack your patience before you head out the door to celebrate America's birthday. Back to you.
All right. Aaron, thank you so much for tips on how to travel safely this weekend. Let's bring in AAA spokesperson Aixa Diaz. Good to have you with us. Happy holiday. So you're projecting in AAA roughly, 85% of people who are going to be traveling are going to be driving. What are the biggest challenges that travelers are likely to face on the road? What's the best way to prepare?
And Joe, most people drive because it's the most convenient and most economical in many cases. Even though gas prices have been high, it's still cheaper to just fill up once or twice along your road trip than have to buy multiple plane tickets if you've got a family of about 3 or 4 or 5 people. So most people are driving, but they're going to encounter a lot of traffic. We're projecting 61.4 million people will be traveling by car this holiday weekend. And that also means that you want to leave early, but also keep this heat in mind, because we've been talking about this extreme heat, and it can cause a lot on your vehicle. It wreaks havoc on your tires, on your battery. So before you leave, check that tire pressure, check your battery status, make sure that that's okay, and then pack plenty of waters, have a cooler with ice, because if you get stuck on the interstate, and let's say there is some sort of crash on the highway that stops traffic, you might want to turn off your vehicle at some point if you're stuck in standstill traffic. So maybe have a little portable fan as well, but also stay hydrated.
Yeah, keep in mind, just in case the worst case scenario happens while you're in that car and driving in this heat. Aaron mentioned that the fuel costs rising from the war with Iran, not as high as they were earlier this year, but still pretty high, which is why gas prices are on the minds of many travelers. Any tips on how people can maybe save at least a little bit of money at the pump?
Yeah, so signing up for fuel rewards and loyalty programs at gas stations is really smart. AAA partners with Shell Fuel Rewards, and you save at least 5 cents a gallon. That adds up over time. So make sure you do that, but also be mindful of how much stuff is in your vehicle. The heavier your vehicle is, and the more load you put in the trunk, the more your car has to work. Also keep in mind that fuel efficiency peaks at around 50 miles per hour, so speeding is not going to really help you at all. But ultimately, remember that gas has come down. We're about 50 cents cheaper than we were just about a month ago. And even though we are higher than last year, they have been coming down. And so drivers are getting a bit of a relief right now at the pump.
If you could leave travelers with just one important safety reminder this 4th of July weekend, what would it be?
I would say prepare for the worst, but hope for the best. And that means that you pack extra things that you may never need, but you want to have just in case. And especially for people who are flying as well, keep in mind, delays and cancellations are a possibility with the heat, with the volume, and with storms. So have extra snacks with you, have maybe a portable fan with you. That way, if you're stuck on the tarmac because you can't take off, you'll be comfortable.
I know a lot of people did leave yesterday. I think that was supposed to be the biggest travel day, but clearly many people are today because they are off. For those who are driving, are there often good tips as to when is the best time to leave? When are the times you should definitely avoid? And same when people are maybe starting to already think of that return trip. What's some of the best advice there?
Well, certainly returning the earlier the better on Sunday, especially for people who stayed up late on Saturday. They don't want to get up early on Sunday. You want to be the one who gets up early on Sunday and hits the road earlier, because as soon as lunchtime hits on July 5th, those roads are going to be packed. And also, I typically tell people to travel on the holiday itself, like Thanksgiving. It's always lighter on the roads. But July 4th is different. It's an all-day event. You've got people driving all day, driving to parades, the pool, the beach, fireworks. So remember, traffic's going to be heavy all day on Saturday as well. But the earlier the better. Typically morning hours are better than afternoon hours. And if you're a night driver and you don't mind driving at night, then usually around 8 p.m. is when things start to lighten up a bit.
Plus, morning and night, it's a little bit cooler out, which helps right now with these temperatures. Aixa, good to have you with us. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Americans coast to coast are getting ready to celebrate the nation's 250th birthday. A number of events, big and small, are planned throughout the weekend to mark the milestone. President Trump will oversee events from the National Mall, while those jaw-dropping tall ships are set to grace the eastern seaboard. NBC News correspondent Alice Barr joins us from Washington. More on all the festivities. Alice, good morning. Happy 4th of July Eve.
And the same to you, Joe. A lot of stirring on this holiday eve because Americans are not missing a chance to celebrate this 250th anniversary 4th of July. But officials are urging everyone to stay hydrated and weather aware, with scorching heat blanketing much of the country.
The next age of man is yet to you.
We dreamed of setting foot on the ground. We're not alone.
You can see it from the skies across America, mowed into a lawn in North Carolina.
200 feet, you don't roll around one time.
Formed in a human Liberty Bell in Philadelphia, Americans making their mark on 250 years of history. But it's what we'll see in the skies that'll really steal the show. Boston giving an early peek as New York is welcoming majestic tall ships while working out its finishing fireworks touches.
Non-stop action and beautiful art in the sky.
And in Washington, D.C., final preparations for what's billed as the world's largest fireworks display.
At least 100 times more than an average 4th of July display that you would see.
President Trump is set to speak on the National Mall for the Freedom 250 Salute to America.
Right now you have the hottest country anywhere in the world, and we do.
The event start time now delayed from 1 to 5 p.m. because of the triple-digit heat.
The Capitol 4th concert is supposed to be tonight. Authorities, though, closed a rehearsal to the public last night, and so they're going to make a decision this morning about whether the full concert can safely happen tonight in this extreme heat show.
Yeah, and Alice, we heard a brief comment from President Trump there, but what else is he saying about the event and just what we can expect this weekend?
Yeah, I mean, he's saying this is going to be the biggest kind of celebration of its kind. We know that they're going for a Guinness World Record with the fireworks display with more than 850,000 pyrotechnics set to be launched during the 40-minute show. The president has also said he's going to give a long speech. That's supposed to start at 9:45 and the fireworks show at 10:30. Before that, there's the Great American State Fair that's open. There are flyovers starting at 1:15, and there are a lot of reminders for anybody that's going to be out there to use the hydration stations, to get some breaks in the shade, and to just be smart while you're out in this hot conditions.
There will be no shortage of fireworks and big displays happening throughout this weekend. All right, Alice, thank you so much. The office of longtime Kentucky Senator Mitch McConnell says he remains in the hospital, and now we're learning more details about that recent medical episode at his home. NBC's Gary Grumbach joins us with the very latest. Gary, good morning. So Senator McConnell's office has not publicly disclosed why the 84-year-old was admitted to the hospital. That happened back on June 14th. Of course, his medical history in recent years is well documented. Walk us through what we do know about the senator's health and just what happened at his home.
Hey there, Joe. So we do know Senator Mitch McConnell was hospitalized on June 14th, and he remains hospitalized today. We also know that on June 14th, there was a call to Mitch McConnell's house in Washington, D.C., because someone was experiencing cardiac arrest, and they received CPR. Now, we do not know if the same person was Mitch McConnell, but McConnell is 84 years old, and he has a series of medical complications over the past several years, including falls during events in Washington, D.C., several freezing up incidents on camera. He has said he will not seek re-election after his term ends in January, Joe.
All right, Gary, let's get to some other Washington headlines out of D.C. A U.S. Olympian has been indicted in connection with some of the damage that was found at the Lincoln Memorial Reflecting Pool. We know earlier in the spring, the pool underwent this multi-million-dollar rehabilitation project. What more are we learning about this?
U.S. Attorney Jeanine Pirro announcing yesterday that David Hearn, he's an Olympic canoeist, he has been indicted on one count of causing more than $1,000 in damage to the Lincoln Memorial Reflecting Pool. You'll remember that part of Hearn's arrest was actually caught on camera, and he said to NBC News afterwards that he caused no damage, that he didn't do anything wrong. His attorney said the same thing yesterday. Here's what U.S. Attorney Jeanine Pirro had to say about the incident.
This was a deliberate act to damage the reflecting pool at the National Mall. Our evidence further shows that the National Park Service employees observed Hearn actually forcefully and violently pulling up and removing the bottom liner with both hands.
Now, there have been several arrests made, but there's been only one person indicted for any kind of damage to the reflecting pool. You'll remember that the White House and President Trump have made several allegations without providing evidence that there was significant damage made to the reflecting pool, including alleging a 250 to 300-foot gash in the reflecting pool. We've tried. We have found no evidence of that gash.
No
National
evidence
Park Service, Department of Interior, and U.S. Park Police haven't responded to requests for comment on that. Joe?
Gary, while we have you, I want to ask you about a memo that was issued by the FBI. It's related to the investigation of the 2020 presidential election in Georgia. That's a state, if you recall, President Trump lost to Joe Biden, but the president continues to claim without any evidence that the election was rigged. What is the FBI focusing on here?
So the FBI is asking every single one of their field offices around the country, all 56 of them, to assign people to a specific issue in Fulton County. Every single one of their field offices around the country, all 56 of them, to assign people to a specific issue in Fulton County, in the Atlanta. What happened during the 2020 election? We're talking 250 employees dedicated to this effort. It's really an unprecedented moving of resources into this sort of situation. In January, you'll remember the FBI had executed a search warrant at a Fulton County headquarters, essentially, where all the ballots existed, and they took a lot of the ballots, they took a lot of the ballot images, and they took some of the voter rolls as well. It's unclear exactly what they are looking for here, but they're certainly doing some sort of very serious level of investigating here, Jeff.
6 years after the election. All right, Gary, thank you so much. We're learning more details about this week's sky-high stunt at the Empire State Building here in New York. The couple that captured the country's attention by climbing to the top of the spire appeared in court yesterday. They're facing numerous charges. NBC News correspondent Valerie Castro has more on how they made it past security.
We're learning new details about that alarming security breach. Those two climbers with a jaw-dropping, death-defying stunt at the Empire State Building.
Is he proposing to her?
The couple seen leaving court apparently still wearing the same outfits they scaled the spire in.
It was very cold last night.
Angelina Nicolau and Ivan Kuznetsov now charged with several felonies, including reckless endangerment for trespassing overnight in a restricted area, according to the criminal complaint. Sources telling NBC News investigators are looking into whether the pair may have used a separate tenant entrance to the building to avoid security screening, and whether the pair may have been scouting the building prior and even left some tools in advance of the operation.
We just need to relax now.
At one point, photographers asking them to recreate their kiss more than 1,400 feet in the air.
I kiss. All right.
Their attorney speaking after their court appearance.
I will say, it's nice to have somebody wearing a black mask doing a message of peace.
But the NYPD says their actions won't go unpunished.
Unacceptable, and there's going to be consequences.
Our thanks to Valerie Castro for that report. The couple faces up to 7 years in prison if convicted on all charges. They are now due back in court in late August. Let's say here in New York, in case you haven't heard, there is a wedding that is happening. Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce officially kicked off their multi-day wedding celebration last night. And ahead of tonight's nuptials, a representative for Swift says the couple donated $26 million to 20 charities across the country. NBC News entertainment correspondent Chloe Malas has more on the celebrity guests, the family arrivals, and all the wedding buzz.
At Toyota of Easley, we're passionate about finding a car that fits your lifestyle and budget. That's why we hold a large inventory of pre-owned vehicles with all makes and models.
And all the wedding buzz.
The wedding festivities for Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce officially kicking off. Black SUVs seen pulling up to New York's Madison Square Garden ahead of what is expected to be their rehearsal dinner at the venue's Emphasis Theater, according to an NYPD memo. Right here behind me is a white tent that has been erected to protect the privacy of guests when they arrive.
How are you feeling today, Miss Kelce?
Photographers catching Kelce's mom after landing in New York. A source at MSG telling NBC News MSG employees are not allowed back on premises until Sunday. Also saying the couple is playing on the venue's name with a garden theme, adding that inside the space has been transformed with drapery and chandeliers hung, and more than 1,000 guests are expected to attend Friday's Big Bash and enjoy performances from artists like Stevie Nicks. Outside,
I'll give the marriage 5 years. I'll give it 5 years. For her to make it a spectacle is alarming. If you're going to get married, get married. Don't make a big damn show of it.
Road closures and ramped up security around the arena. For those still skeptical about the impending nuptials, officers were spotted with folders marked Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce wedding.
This is normal for Taylor Swift to have people speculate because she loves keeping her fans on edge. It's part of the thrill. It's part of the fun of being a Swiftie.
Chloe Malas, NBC News.
All right, much more to come here on Morning News Now. Later this hour, the football frenzy continues. We're going to have highlights from another wild day of World Cup matches, including one call that's making some fans furious. Up first after the break, Venezuela holding on to hope. The incredible rescue more than a week after those powerful earthquakes. That's next. Welcome back. It has been more than a week now since deadly earthquakes devastated Venezuela, and the death toll stands at more than 2,200 people, with thousands more injured. But even amid the despair, moments of hope do still emerge. Yesterday, rescuers pulled out a 44-year-old man alive from the rubble of a collapsed basement 8 days after the quakes. Let's check in with correspondent Ana Vanessa Herrera, who's been following the earthquakes from the beginning for us. Ana, good morning. We appreciate you joining us again. Let's start with that incredible rescue. How was this man found, and do we know how he's doing now?
We don't have information, Joe, about how he is doing now. Everyone who was being rescued is taken immediately to a hospital nearby, wherever they can find a place for them to get the first aid they need. And that is something that doctors take very seriously. To share the news, the family members we do know are happy about the rescue and this miraculous story. And let me tell you, I went there to La Guaira just minutes after this happened, and everyone was so happy. Everyone was celebrating still, even after he was already taken out of the area. And a lot of people on the ground are just waiting to hear and see those kind of stories more and more. People are just hanging to that hope that others can be found alive, Joe.
Yeah, I'm sure it is offering hope to so many who have been struggling over these last several days. As you've been reporting, the Venezuelan government is facing just an avalanche of criticism over its response, many arguing the government was just too slow to act. The country's acting president now pushing back against those claims. What more can you tell us about that?
Yes, on the ground, that is the only thing you can hear. So there are two things happening when you go to Ground Zero, La Guaira, or even if you see in Caracas, in one of these improvised shelters. So the only thing you hear is that the government acted way too late. I've been talking to rescuers, civilians, family members who were the ones who jumped into the debris to look for their loved ones, and they tell me that the government showed up until 2 or 3 days later, and that even now, military are just guarding the streets and they're controlling traffic, but they are not inside of the fallen buildings looking for people. That is a job that civilians are taking upon themselves. This is something that you hear over and over. But now, in this shelters, lack of a better word, people are saying that the government is also late on taking care of those who survived. They are living in tents. They're living out of the goodness of all the volunteers in Caracas and other states in the country who are taking them, who are giving them food, water, whatever they need. But the government, they say, is nowhere to be found. Joe?
Anna, often after a disaster like this, the world moves on quickly, but we have to remember for Venezuela, the recovery, the rebuilding process will take months and years. So, Anna, what are some of the big challenges that remain right now more than a week later?
Well, right now, everyone is talking about housing. So that is the huge challenge. What is going to happen to those who survived and lost their houses? Because it's not only the buildings who were absolutely destroyed, but it's also the buildings that are right now impossible to live in. So there is a reconstruction that's going to take, as you said, Joe, a long time. Even more in Venezuela, everything takes time in Venezuela. There is a water shortage, a power outlet shortage, and there is a problem with organization and protocol that the government is not taking care of. And that is the immediate problem. But then, again, I talked to doctors, and they said there's a health problem right now in the making. There's too many people are exposed to so many viruses, and the health system, as we know, is already broken. So they fear this might be the great big challenge just in the immediate future. Joe?
All right, Anna, we appreciate your reporting. Thank you so much, as always. It is a day of mourning for Ukraine's capital, Kyiv, following a deadly new chapter in the war with Russia. Ukrainian authorities say at least 30 people were killed and dozens were injured in a Russian missile and drone attack on Thursday. It's the deadliest to hit Kyiv this year. Ukraine's President Zelensky says 10 people are still missing as rescuers continue to search for survivors. NBC News international correspondent Danielle Hamamdjian joins us now with more on this. So Danielle, walk us through the scale and scope of this attack and what we're hearing from both the Russians and the Ukrainians about it.
Yeah, good morning, Joe. You're right. A day of mourning declared in the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv after this horrific attack, not just the deadliest Russian assault since the beginning of the year, but possibly one of the biggest since the beginning of the war back in February 2022, with officials describing it as a night of horror. The Ukrainian Air Force says that Russia launched 74 missiles and 496 drones overnight. The situation on the ground now, after a relatively calm night, while there are still rescue operations underway, according to the president, Volodymyr Zelensky, at least 10 people are still missing, on top of, as you mentioned, the 30 people dead, nearly 100 injured. Now, the work of forensic experts in these situations, although tragic and very grim, also very crucial. There are buildings that have not just been destroyed, but have collapsed, and so they are working to identify body parts to ultimately identify the dead. Moscow said this attack was in retaliation for Ukrainian drone strikes on Russia, which have intensified, and they're targeting energy infrastructure, and that has triggered a fuel crisis in Russia. In recent months, Russia has also struggled to advance, and it's also in some cases lost territory, with the Ukrainians increasingly effective not only in their tactics but their counteroffensive, Joe.
Years into this war, but it's still important to ask where things stand in those stalled peace talks. I know President Zelensky was asked about that in any just recent contacts with the U.S. yesterday. What's he saying?
Yeah, President Zelensky said that a senior defense official in Ukraine met with the U.S. president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner. That happened over the past few days. But in-person talks between the Russians and the Ukrainians, that hasn't happened since February, since before the U.S. went to war with Iran. Now, Zelensky said that he was hoping to have a one-on-one with the U.S. president next week in Turkey during the NATO summit there, Joe.
Also, Danielle, we're following developments out of Monaco. An arrest warrant's been issued for a person who's suspected to be behind Monday's parcel bombing. We talked about that earlier this week. Authorities do believe the attack was targeting a Ukrainian-born oligarch. What more can you tell us about this case and just how it might tie to the war?
Quite a few developments here. It's been a big story here in Europe. It's grabbed a lot of headlines, not just in Europe, but beyond as well. And a big reason for that is because of where it takes place. Monaco, a tax haven, a principality, home to the wealthy, usually associated with yachts and casinos. Well, this week it was associated with the explosion at the entrance of a residential building in Monaco, where the victims of that explosion were 3 people, among them believed to be a Ukrainian oligarch, his partner, and his son. Well, here's the update from the prosecutor, Joe. They believe the suspect, who until now they believe was a man, is actually a woman, a 39-year-old woman who Interpol has just identified as Anastasia Berezovska, who who was born in Ukraine. Officials believe she was disguised as a man using a remote control to detonate the bomb. A parcel had been left at the entrance of the building. The suspect, according to authorities, waited for those three individuals to come back from dinner nearby. The suspect, they believe, had scouted the area over the past few days. Her last known residence, they say, is Germany. The car that she used registered in Germany as well. Critically, officials believe she did not act alone here and that there could be accomplices given the complexity of the explosive device. The target of the attack, though not officially named by authorities, is widely being reported as Vadim Yermolov, a very wealthy real estate developer who was born in Ukraine, of Ukrainian origin, but who renounced his Ukrainian citizenship back in 2019. Authorities haven't commented on whether or not they believe this is tied to the war, but given the geopolitical context, given who this man is, what his work what he does for work, it is certainly a line of inquiry that they cannot ignore, Joe.
Okay.
All right, major update there. Danielle, thank you so much. Let's get some more international headlines. Developing news out of Albania. Protests there turned violent over a project linked to President Trump's son-in-law. NBC News International correspondent Claudio Lubanga joins us from Rome to take us around the world in 60 seconds. Claudio, good morning.
Good morning, Joe. That's right. Authorities in Albania say 12 police officers were injured and 18 protesters were detained after the latest demonstration against plans by Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump to turn that island off the Adriatic coast into a luxury resort turned violent. On Thursday, officers fired tear gas, pepper spray, and water cannon at demonstrators outside Parliament in the capital, Tirana. And protesters responded by throwing rocks, eggs, and plastic bottles. This was the latest in a wave of protests known as the Flamingo Revolution, named after the bird protesters say is threatened by Kushner and Trump's plan. Let's go to France now, where wildfires raged across the south of the country on Thursday, fueled by the recent heat wave. Local authorities say 800 firefighters tried to tackle the biggest blaze that ran over more than 2,000 acres, and in another area, 1,500 people had to be evacuated from 3 campsites. French Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu said nearly 7,000 fires have broken out since the start of the summer. The situation in typical French aplomb, fairly tense. And let's end this tour of the world in Brazil, where sightings of humpback whales off Rio de Janeiro are becoming more common. Experts say this is thanks to a pause in commercial whaling decided in the 1980s. Enrico Marcobaldi, co-founder of the Humpback Whale Project, said that the whale population jumped from around 2,000 to 35,000 in 40 years. This also led to a boost in demand for whale watching excursions to spot humpback whales during their annual migration, Joe.
All right, add that to your list of things to do in Rio. Thanks so much, Claudio. Appreciate it. To the World Cup now, where it was another dramatic day of action on the pitch. Yesterday, Portugal defeated Croatia 2-1 to seal their place in the round of 16. Croatia led early in the second half before Cristiano Ronaldo tied it up with a penalty kick. Then, with the game seemingly destined for extra time, Portugal scored in added time to make it 2-1. The chaos though only just beginning. Minutes later, Croatia thought they had scored to tie the game again, but the goal was waved off after a lengthy video check by the referee. It was deemed to be offside. The decision sparked fury among some Croatian fans who began hurling bottles on the pitch. Portugal's win sets up a mouth-watering clash with neighbors Spain in the next round.
Oh, that's going to be interesting.
Sailed through their match against Austria, winning 3-0. Elsewhere, Switzerland beat Algeria 2-0, that country's first World Cup knockout round win since 1938. The Swiss will take on the winners of today's game between Colombia and Ghana. Defending champions Argentina also in action against Cape Verde, while Australia takes on Egypt in the final matches of the round. Coming up, more than just a label change, California now banning those sell-by dates you see at the grocery store. More on the move meant to address the growing problem of food waste. You're watching Morning News Now.
to the ER after a car accident, you could still be owed a huge check. No, seriously, I didn't go to the ER and still got paid $82,000, and all I had to do was qualify. Most people think visible injuries and car...
California is taking a major step toward cutting down on food waste. Earlier this week, the state's new law took effect, banning sell-by labels on most products. It's part of an effort to cut through the confusion created by nearly 50 different food date labels used across the country. New York has also approved a similar bill, now awaiting the governor's signature, while several other states are considering similar changes. Nearly a third of the food in the U.S. ends up in the trash. That's about 133 billion pounds, worth an estimated $161 billion each year. Joining us now is Dr. Tricia Pasricha, gastroenterologist at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center. Doctor, good to have you with us to talk more about this. Those sell-by and other food date labels that we see, what do they really mean? Walk us through that.
Yeah, good morning, Joe. Well, the sell-by dates were actually never intended for me and you. The sell-by dates was designed for retailers, for the grocers, and they helped indicate to them when they should rotate out the stock, because the sell-by date sort of tells us when the quality starts to become noticeably different. They weren't intended for us. What's more helpful for us is now what California has done is dichotomize the labels into just two. It's really simplified the language. The one that tells us about the quality of the product is now going to be a best if used by label or a best if frozen by label. And that's going to tell you after this date that peak quality is going to start to decline. But remember, that label is designed with a little bit of a buffer in mind. You have a couple days by which you can probably still eat those foods. On the other hand, the use by date, that's more of a hard line about the safety of the food.
So this ban by California on the sell-by date, do you think it will make shopping a little less confusing?
I think so. I think there's two kinds of people out there. There's the kind of person that uses that sell-by date as a hard and fast rule, and then there's another kind that's like, we have a couple of days here. And then, of course, these two people often find each other and get married. And, I think now we're going to eliminate a lot of those arguments first thing in the morning on weekends and at the grocery store, because it's going to be a lot more simple. When it's a use-by date, we're all on the same page. Don't use that product afterwards.
I'm the hard and fast person, so I guess I might have some concerns about this because I always feel like, oh, nope, we've hit the date. I'm throwing this out. What are some simple ways to just tell whether food is still safe to eat if you're not relying necessarily on that label?
Well, I think a lot of people use the old-fashioned sniff test, and so I think there's a couple of things you can look at that will tell you don't eat this food. One, if you see any obvious mold, discoloration, and, technically if it's something like a hard cheese and you see some mold, you could actually cut around it, leaving about a 1-inch gap. If it's a softer cheese, anything with liquid, you see mold, that's a hard stop. If it's sour, it has an unusual odor, hence the sniff test, anything off, that will tell you, be safe, let's not eat this.
Real quick, for people who want to cut down on food waste, which is a big driver here without putting yourself or your families at risk, what are some simple rules you can follow when it comes to storing, freezing, deciding what you keep, what you toss?
Yeah, this is important because the average U.S. consumer loses roughly about $728 per year to food waste because of confusion about the labels. A simple rule about that test, the sniff test, is that if it feels off to you, that's a good test, throw it out. If it passes the sniff test, though, you should still take it with a grain of salt, because there are some scenarios where you might not be able to appreciate that, and that's really important if you're at higher risk for things like bacterial infection, and I'm talking about pregnant women, older people. So remember, the sniff test, it's helpful when something's off. Take it with a grain of salt if it passes that test for you, though, and then still look at the labels and still decide, if I'm at high risk, let me not take the risk.
All right. Dr. Tricia Pasricha, so good to have you with us. Thanks for joining us. Appreciate it. Coming up, a world of pure imagination and frustration. Netflix announcing a new Willy Wonka-themed reality show, complete with the AI-generated voice of the original Willy Wonka himself. My critics say the move is not the golden ticket for Hollywood. That's next on Morning News.
Okay. Tap screen, tap screen, tap
Back now
screen,
with a look
please.
at how artificial intelligence is helping to turn a world of pure imagination into a new Netflix show. The Willy Wonka-themed reality series actually uses AI to recreate the voice of the late actor Gene Wilder, who played Wonka on screen in the original movie. But as NBC News Now anchor Gotti Schwartz reports, not everyone is happy about it.
Come with me, and you'll be in a world of pure imagination.
It's a voice that instantly transports you to a world of pure imagination.
Like to sleep.
Gene Wilder brought Willy Wonka to life in the iconic 70s film Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. Now Wonka is back for a reality TV reboot. Netflix releasing a trailer this week for its new competition series, Wonka's The Golden Ticket.
A whole new generation of real-life golden ticket holders will compete for a life-changing prize.
And if Wonka's voice sounds familiar, that's because it's the AI-generated voice of Wilder, who died in 2016.
Marvel at the magic you remember.
Wilder's wife and estate granted permission for his voice to be recreated for the show. That tech is provided by 11 Labs, a company that struck similar deals with actors like Michael Caine, whose AI audio likeness will be voicing an audiobook of Homer's The Odyssey.
His name is Odysseus, king of the small rocky island called Ithaca.
With Matthew McConaughey investing.
Happy Friday, everyone.
But not everyone is sweet on the idea. Why? Just why? It just feels so wrong.
I mean, we all know Roald Dahl would have absolutely hated this.
The reality is we've been playing this game for a long, long time.
Dominic Patton is an executive editor at Deadline.
And I'm talking about holograms of Tupac at Coachella. I'm talking about Humphrey Bogart and Elizabeth Taylor showing up in Pepsi or Coca-Cola commercials like 20 years ago.
Does it seem like society has a particular hang-up when it comes to combining nostalgia with AI?
I think so. I can't stand AI slop. But I think there's a difference between AI slop and people trying to do something creative.
The danger must be growing.
Let's admit it. There is a creepy, charming aspect to AI, like there is to Willy Wonka itself. So maybe in that sense, it's a perfect marriage.
Finally this hour, a different way of looking at America's birthday. If what happened 250 years ago happened today, you'd probably get an alert on your phone. Declaration of Independence, unanimously adopted. Of course, that's not how it worked back then. So what was it like when this historic document first spread across the colonies? Well, a new book titled When the Declaration of Independence Was News explores that question and why the story still matters today. We're joined now by the author, Dr. Emily Sneff. Good to have you with us. So first question, tell us what inspired you to write this book?
Thank you for having me. I've been working on the Declaration of Independence for about a decade at this point, very much knowing that the anniversary was coming. And I was really struck by this period of time when the Declaration was news, when people did not know what was going to happen next. And when we get their sort of first reactions to the news of independence, they're really fascinating.
In a world where we now get the latest news in seconds on our phones, we sometimes maybe forget about a time when news spread much, much more slowly. How was this essential document spread across the countries? How long did it take?
It would have taken quite some time. So I live in the greater Philadelphia area. If I was here in 1776, I would have had the news within a couple of days. But it would have taken a few more days to get up to New York, about a week and a half to get to Massachusetts, and a full month to get down to the southernmost states. And people would have learned the news through broadside printings, the text printed on one side of a big sheet of paper, as well as newspapers and public readings where people would gather in the streets to hear the Declaration read aloud.
If you got hit, even as a passenger or in an Uber, you would need to try this. Were you recently injured in a car accident?
In the streets to hear the Declaration read aloud.
What surprised you most about how Americans first learned about this historic document?
Well, I think you would assume that there was a lot of celebration, and there certainly was. People were cheering, giving huzzas. They were tearing down the symbols of the King and Great Britain. There was a lot of coming together around this moment. But there were also a lot of people who were upset about the Declaration or very concerned about what might happen next. My favorite account from 1776 is from a 17-year-old girl on the island of Nantucket, who wrote in her diary that the Declaration was horrible. That's not something we expect to hear from someone in 1776.
See, there's always someone who has a differing opinion from everyone else. So beyond the huzzas you mentioned, how else did people react to the 1776 news? And how did the celebrations of Independence Day back then compare with how we now celebrate today?
There were a lot of similar elements then to what we expect today. There would have been parades, cannons firing off, bells ringing, people cheering, and then fireworks at night. So there's a lot of things that we associate with the 4th of July that go back to that initial period of time when the news was being spread. It's just in 1776, the celebrations happened over the course of a month instead of on a single night.
So as families get ready to celebrate this holiday weekend, and of course that will include fireworks like it did so long ago, what is it you hope readers will keep in mind about this 250th birthday, and what do you hope they might learn from your book as well?
Well, I hope that people will take inspiration to read the Declaration or to join one of the public readings that's happening in their communities this weekend. There's a lot in the Declaration that you might not realize is in there. And there's words that have been relatable across the generations of American history. So being able to step back in time and get that communal experience of hearing the Declaration and responding to it, I think is a great way to engage with our founding document this year.
I love how we're still doing those public readings. Real quick, how are you celebrating this weekend?
I will be sweating on Independence Mall. Looking forward to it.
You will not be alone there. All right, Dr. Emily Snepp, good to have you with us. Thanks for joining us this morning. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
That is going to do it for this hour of Morning News Now, but don't go anywhere. The news continues right now.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and cut this off right here. Thank y'all for being here, and I hope to see y'all again soon. Peace.